So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this collaboration between Arihanta Institute and Sanctuary Doc. We are really delighted that you're here. I'm Deanna Hewlett, one of your co-hosts for the day, and I work as an animal photojournalist, a writer. I'm also vice president of the board of directors at Sanctuary Doc, which I'll share more about shortly. I'm also a student in the Engaged Jain Studies master's program at Arihanta Institute. And I'll share a little bit more now about the collaborators and also why we're here. So Arihanta Institute is dedicated to advancing education, scholarship, critical research, and public dissemination of real-world application of the Jain principles of nonviolence, ahimsa, and compassion, karuna. Our mission is to empower individuals with knowledge to embrace and apply these principles as a force for positive change, addressing the most pressing issues of our time with courage and compassion. And we are collaborating today with Sanctuary Doc, and their mission is to tell visual stories of compassion for animals amidst our world's biggest challenges. So we are a multimedia nonprofit and a project. We're illuminating the major issues facing our world today by focusing on animals and the people who rescue them. So one of the reasons that we are here is because I had an idea and I wanted to bring two organizations that I am very involved with together to bring some of our visionaries and leaders in these organizations to have a conversation about what a compassionate future looks like. And I wanted to bring different disciplines together who are all working in animal advocacy and who also have contemplative practice, meditation, studying texts as part of their vision for their work. So I thought it would be interesting to bring scholar practitioners, artists, filmmakers together into a dialogue about where we go from here. So we are going to, I'll give introductions to our panelists, and then we will screen the film. And then we'll have an open Q&A session. So at any time during the film, you're welcome to drop your question into the Q&A feature here on Zoom. Feel free to just jot them down or write them in that feature whenever they come up. And we'll get to them during our panel discussion. So the film is about 15 minutes long. We'll then go from there, and then we'll just wrap up in an hour. So I'd like to introduce you now to our panelists today. Christopher Jain Miller is the co-founder and vice president of academic affairs at Arihanta Institute and professor of Jain and yoga studies. He completed his PhD in the study of religion at the University of California at Davis and is also a visiting researcher at the University of Zurich, Asian Orient Institute, and visiting professor at Claremont School of Theology, where he co-developed and co-runs a remotely available master's degree program, which I'm very familiar with, focusing on engaged Jain studies. His current research focuses on engaged Jainism and modern yoga, and he's the author of a number of articles and book chapters concerned with Jainism and the practice of modern yoga. He's the author of Embodying Transnational Yoga, Eating, Singing, and Breathing in Transformation, and co-editor of the volumes Engaged Jainism, Critical and Constructive Approaches to the Study of Jain Social Engagement, and Beacons of Dharma, Spiritual Exemplars for the Modern Age. So welcome, Chris. Really glad that you're here for this discussion and screening. And Jonathan Dickstein is an assistant professor at Arihanta Institute, beginning in May 2023, and specializes in South Asian religions, religion and ecology, and comparative religious ethics. He received his doctoral degree in religious studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he wrote his dissertation on ancient Indian animal taxonomies and the relevance for religious ritual and dietary practice. Fascinating. Jonathan's current work focuses on Jainism and contemporary ecological issues, and accordingly extends into critical animal studies, food studies, and diaspora studies. So welcome, Jonathan. Glad you're here as well. And I'll introduce our film's director. Thomas Machowicz is a photographer and filmmaker focusing on animal rescue efforts and social issues. He started documenting animal rescue in 2018 after a visit to a sanctuary in Nosara, Costa Rica. And in 2023, Thomas and Molly Condit co-founded Sanctuary Doc. He considers himself a conduit for stories meant to raise the consciousness of humanity and uses photography, film, lectures, mentorships, and workshops as tools to explore and share the human experience. Thomas's work has been published by BBC News, the Associated Press, Routers, Liberation, Vox, the Raw Society, and We Animals Media. He is pro-member of the Raw Society and a regular contributor to We Animals, and his work has been featured in multiple animal rights campaigns. So welcome, Thomas, of course. We are glad that you're here as well. So I think with all of those introductions and a welcome again to everyone who is here live with us today, I think it's time to watch a film. So just to pass it on to Thomas and let you all settle in.
Also ich kann von Anfang an, habe ich das eigentlich im BA gesagt, dass ich da gar nicht mitarbeiten will, weil ich habe gewusst, ich werde eine Beziehung aufbauen zu diesen Tieren und wenn es dann heisst, die müssen in die Metzger oder so, ist das für mich immer, also ist das schwierig, oder?
Also meine grösste Herausforderung, den Betrieb so zu führen, ist eigentlich, weil es nicht zu meiner Einstellung passt, dir gegenüber.
Ja, sie haben uns ein Jahr lang das Überleben gesichert, finanziell. Und jetzt, ja, als Dank tut man es quasi schlachten.
Und erst, als ich eben gefunden habe, jetzt muss ich mal schauen, was ich mit diesem Betrieb eigentlich will, bin ich darauf gestossen, dass es sich überhaupt nicht gut ist. Also ja, ich war wie betriebsblind durch das, dass ich halt immer da war. Und mein Vater glaube ich auch, weil er ist auch. Er hat es auch nicht besser gewusst, ja.
Ich habe einfach gewusst, es muss etwas ändern, aber ich habe nicht gewusst, wie kann ich es anpacken kann. Und es war so wie eine Erleichterung, als ich Sarah getroffen habe und sie mir hat gesagt, dass es eben, wie gesagt, kein Problem ist, hier einfach weiter zu starten.
A transformation would quickly is the transformation of a farm that used to exploit animals into a farm that is now no longer exploiting animals but still working as a farm. I'm Sarah and we are on Hofnar, which is a farm and a sanctuary. My why started when I was a child. I love animals and I always tried to help animals in some way or other. I became an activist, I did undercover research, I did a lot of stuff. And when I realized that by changing farms into either sanctuaries or vegan farms and take the animals out of the food system, then I would actually rescue many, many more animals than if I just rescue one animal. So after the first phone call with a farmer who wants to transfarm, I go to the place, I need to see it. And then we talk about their vision, their wishes, their hopes, their passions. We look at their surroundings, what could they plant, what could they live from, what could they sell. Then we also look at the finances. And of course we talk about the animals, will they stay there, will they go somewhere else? What can we do for the animals? We're going to a farm with cows again. This time it's like the so-called Ausmelkkühe, the cows that have been giving milk for a long time and now are shortly before slaughter, a few months before slaughter. They come to this farm where they can be exploited a little bit more even, and then they are all being slaughtered. So you fix the tail here and you fix the neck there. Yeah.
Right. So they're not very, it's not really comfortable, but it's just how the way it was. Since my grandfather did it, it was the way it is now. And so that's what I want to change now.
The main problem with animal industry is the life they have before they are killed. Many of these animals don't get to live any of their needs, just food and water maybe, but they don't see the sunlight, or they just see it not very often. They don't get to be with their families. They have hardly anything they need. The whole life, which I wouldn't call life, before the killing is actually the worst.
Ja, also eben für mich ist es kein Zuschauen. Ich meine, eben so eine Kuh, wie es dort liegt, die ist riesengroß und man sieht ja selber, sie hat wirklich keinen Platz. Und noch eine Kuh wie sie ist ziemlich klein, also sie kann gut hier stehen, aber wenn sie liegt, liegt sie gleich außerhalb von diesem Lager und das ist für mich nicht... Also es ist kein Tierwohl so, ja. Also eben für mich ist es keine Möglichkeit, so weiterzufahren, weil es viel schönere Wege gibt, ein Tier zu haben. Ja.
Once the farmers allow their feelings or their sadness to really be there and they decide to do transformation, there is a patch where it's really hard for them because they are still in the system, and until they're really out, all these decisions have to be made, which animal to rescue, which not, and it's quite a heavy way for a while. We're going to a farm that's income is based on chicken farming for eggs. And the reason why I'm in touch with them is that the farmers don't handle the chicken suffering within egg farming anymore, and they were looking for a way out.
Wir haben einen Biobetrieb mit knapp 20 Hektaren Land, haben vor allem Legehennen, einen 2000er-Stall, Ackerbau und noch ein paar Mutterkühe und Schafe. Der Hauptgrund ist, so viele Hühner aufeinander funktioniert gesundheitlich für die Huhn gar nicht. Also Verletzung, Kannibalismus, Krankheiten kann man nicht vermeiden in so grossen Stellen.
Sagen wir jetzt mal, die ganze Haltung hier wäre super toll, perfekt. Würde uns das gleich noch stören, dass wir einfach die Hühner jedes Jahr schlachten müssen.
Für das ein Umdenken stattfindet, braucht es meiner Meinung nach sehr, sehr viel Aufklärung und auch Beispiele. Das ist sicher ein Teil, den wir auch werden probieren zu machen, dass wir gerade auch andere Landwirte hoffentlich ein bisschen dazu führen, mal vorbeizukommen und aufzuzeigen, dass es auch andere Möglichkeiten gibt und nicht nur das, wo man das Gefühl hat, das ist das Einzige, was funktioniert. Ich fühle mich im Moment viel besser, weil ich weiss, dass es ändert. Ich hatte in den letzten paar Wochen ziemlich Mühe gehabt, weil es mich recht belastet hat alles. Und jetzt bin ich ein bisschen freier geworden, weil ich weiss, was wird kommen.
A transformation needs to be coherent, like the whole system needs to be kind of a peaceful system. You couldn't just say, can I transform the cow's place but have still pigs for meat or something? Or can I just have this whole place kind of peaceful, but what I eat, no one needs to care? It has to be coherent, but that can also take time, of course. I'm not pushing anyone into anything, but I'm suggesting and trying to make logics work.
Ich habe den Betrieb seit 2014 und sind seit gut 2 Jahren ein Lebenshof.
Was so der Unterschied ist von einem produzierenden Betrieb und von uns jetzt vom Lebenshof, ist zum Beispiel unsere Kühe auf der Weide, die mit ihren Kälbchen oder jetzt sind sie halt ein bisschen grösser, mit ihren Kindern dürfen zusammen sein. Das Kalb trinkt auch vom Uter. Das ist in der Milchwirtschaft eigentlich nicht so üblich. Also da tut man ja die Kälbchen immer separieren.
Also meine Eltern haben das eigentlich sehr positiv aufgefasst, auch das gesamte Umfeld im Großen und Ganzen. Meine Mami hat eigentlich immer gesagt, wenn sie im Lotto gewinnt, will sie etwas in die Richtung machen, wie der Hof jetzt ist. So wie
Wird er hässig gefallen?
Er wird hässig, ja.
Schau jetzt.
Wir haben am Anfang auch finanzielle Unterstützung von der Sarah bekommen, wo wir am Anfang noch nicht so viele Patenschaften hatten. Aber mittlerweile haben wir eigentlich unseren eigenen Verein, auch, unseren eigenen Tierschutzverein, wo die Patenschaften darüber laufen und wo das Tier auch über den Tierschutzverein geschützt ist.
I think the success comes from them contacting us. Because if I pick up the phone and I call a farmer and say, hey, this is me, don't you want to transfarm? I think it's not going to work. My story with this farm is that Selina contacted me in a very shy email to ask if I think that also a farm like this could transfarm. And I said I will just come along and have a look, and she said but my husband will never agree. And she showed me this very old cow, and she started crying. She said I wish I could rescue her. And then I said I will rescue her for you, and I will rescue her for you if you commit to making him change. And then she said let's do it.
Also es ist so, dass der Hof ja eigentlich meinem Mann gehört. Also ich bin einfach nur reingeheiratet. Und sie haben vorher eine Mutterkuhhaltung, meine Schwiegereltern. Und ich hatte wie das Gefühl, also ich habe vorher schon kein Fleisch gegessen. Und ich hatte das Gefühl, ja, ich kann wie das verantworten, dass ich sehe, wie die hier aufwachsen und dass sie es ja schön haben. Und dann haben wir das ein Jahr gemacht und ich habe einfach gemerkt, das ist immer wie schwieriger geworden für mich. Ja, jedes Mal, wenn ich wusste, jetzt muss wieder jemand gehen, wieder eine Muni gehen oder eine Kuh, dann habe ich schon wochenlang nicht mehr gut schlafen, ich Klotz auf der Brust gehabt. Und dann habe ich irgendwann gefunden, nein, das geht nicht so für mich. Ich kann nicht mit etwas Geld verdienen, das ich gar nicht unterstütze. Das verlorene Einkommen, das wir jetzt nicht mehr durch die Schlachten haben, bekommen wir rein durch Patenschaften von den Tieren. Wir haben aber auch andere Projekte am Laufen mit dem Anbauen von Kichererbsen. Haben wir Zusammenarbeit mit dem Feinfood von Zürich. Wir anbauen Kichererbsen und sie dann die Kichererbsen verarbeiten zu Hummus. Halt hier nicht Nahrungsmittel eigentlich für Tiere anzubauen und dann werden sie geschlachtet und wir essen es dann, sondern halt einfach so wie der direkte Weg von Anbauen und wir essen, genau. Du musst halt hier, wenn du mit den Kindern hier kannst aufwachsen und ihnen kannst das wie weitergeben, das ist das Schönste, glaube ich. Das Mikrofon. Es ist für mich immer noch, ich könnte immer noch rennen, wirklich für den Moment. Es ist so, es berührt mich immer wieder so extrem, einfach so etwas getroffen haben wie dich. Wirklich. Ja, eben, wie gesagt, ich könnte immer wieder anfangen zu rennen. Oh.
Du bist wunderbar. The whole process of transformation is also a process of personal transformation. It's like piecework for the people themselves. They get in line with their values. I can see that very much.
Also ich würde diesen zukünftigen Lebenshöfen einfach mitgeben, dass sie an das Projekt wirklich glauben, weil es ist eine Wandlung da in der Gesellschaft und überall und es wird ihnen nachher wirklich auch seelisch besser gehen, wenn sie die Umstellung dann machen oder gemacht haben.
wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. I've watched the film numerous times, and every time I'm not only moved by the collective transformation that happens with the animals and the people, which I think is really significant. I just always come away with different things that people said, and also really recognize how this ties into contemplative practices, how it specifically ties into Jainism as a whole. So I'm going to pass it on to Jonathan now to moderate any questions that might be coming in, and also just start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Tommy, for showing that and for making the film. It's certainly powerful in a short time how deep it can get, I think, for viewers, and in so many different aspects. So yes, I would just repeat that attendees can drop any questions in the Q&A, and I will attend to them as we go. But I wanted to first flag how this documentary aligns a lot with some of our programs and materials right now at Arihanta. So I am a professor at Arihanta, but also the lead for the Vegan Studies Initiative. And I will share some links, but I want to highlight that this month, especially around this time, we've been doing a lot of blog posts on Jain animal sanctuaries. We've highlighted Love in Arms Animal Sanctuary in Erie, Colorado. Next week on Monday, Charlene Shah and Kelly Nix from Love in Arms are going to be closing out our Voices in Vegan Studies speaker series on Monday, December 16th. And really interesting is a talk about the sanctuary, but about how do we teach veganism and other kind of individual changes from an animal sanctuary. So people come to the sanctuary, but what do people who are not transfarming or not running a sanctuary, what are they going to walk away with? How can they adjust their lives in some way? And just to give a little bit of a preview, in the new year, on January 27th, we'll be launching an online course on animal sanctuaries from the folks up at Lancaster Farm Sanctuary in Pennsylvania. Jonina Terzi and Sarah Saluzzo are going to give an entire course on animal sanctuaries. So I'm really excited, and I just love how this film kind of kicks off, at least visually, the spirit with which we're entering this period of our programming. And it's really with that I'd like to turn to my first question, which will go to Tommy, but I think also Chris could, as an ethnographer, could speak to this as well, which is that I think that a lot of the times in our Jain Studies program and Vegan Studies program, we go deep into what's and why. So what animal agriculture, animal exploitation, or vegetarianism, and so on, and veganism as well. And when we talk about whys, because we have feelings of compassion or understand the veracity of the ethic of nonviolence. So we have these, and we kind of really go deep into the intricacies of them. And some of our classes go into the hows. Okay, so how do we change our food practices, or how do we kind of change our food systems? But I think this documentary speaks a lot to the how that has been present in the Jain tradition for millennia, which is animal rescue and care. But specifically now, Tommy, in your wheelhouse, is the how of storytelling and the power of storytelling. And I think this is, it's one thing to know certain things about where we want to go, as I sometimes talk about this kind of vegan horizon that the initiative is organized around. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, and in the order you prefer, Tommy, just the how you see storytelling as being such an important how in terms of communication. And obviously, I just would love to ask you about the genesis of the documentary itself. So whichever way you want to feel those is up to you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for giving us a chance to share this documentary with everybody here. Thanks for showing up, everyone. Okay, Yeah, storytelling. I think this is really interesting. You know what comes to mind when I think about this is when I was 19, I did a drum and dance study trip to Guinea in West Africa. And it was my first trip out of the country. I was just like totally wide-eyed and had no idea what was happening in the world. So it was really impactful. Part of what we did on that trip was learn, different types of music, and there is, a tradition of passing on stories and histories orally and through song and music in West Africa and many places all around the world, but this was my experience. And I remember meeting a jelly, which is like the section of people that are basically in charge of passing these stories and information down from one generation to the next. It's a very watered down version of what they do, but for the sake of time, I'll say that. And the one person we met who did this, I guess he was in his 70s or 80s, and the way that he played his instrument and the songs that he played all felt so, to me, this is just what it felt like to me. It all felt so ancient, and especially compared to like the younger guys that we were studying with. And I'm 19 and just having my mind blown by the world, and we're in this small room in his house and listening to him play music that has just been passed down for hundreds of years was really incredible. So what I think about that in terms of storytelling is like this, I'm doing it with photo and video, but it's like a continuation of this way that we share stories as human beings throughout like time, going back to since when we first appeared, right, as humans. So I guess that's my answer to that question of why is storytelling, right, is an important, and what role does it play. Like, it has always played this role and will always continue to play this role. And maybe the way we do it changes in different circumstances, but I think that, my skills are in photo and video, so that's where I have to live. And you can take that and build on it, and there's more opportunities. Sometimes I think, oh, we photographed this, but like, what's the point, right? Like, who's going to see it and where and why, and is it going to change people's minds? Is it really going to do anything? Because I didn't rescue any of the animals in that film, right? Like, I just recorded what was happening. But the action, I think, comes when people like you all today see it and, feel moved by it perhaps and encouraged to do something. It happens because organizations like Arihanta exist and provide a platform to share it, right? And do more with the film. So it's kind of like, the story itself wouldn't really be much without you guys. So that's what I think about storytelling. And as far as the genesis of this film, when I started the Sanctuary Doc project just by myself, photographing animals in sanctuaries because I wanted to take pretty pictures of animals, I was just visiting sanctuaries anytime I was anywhere all over the world. Now, of course, we've turned it into a nonprofit, and we're able to, for the first time, hire photographers and work with writers and work with other photojournalists around the world to tell these stories. And now we have a platform. But this film came about when I was in Switzerland and looking for an animal rescue to do a story on. We met Sarah, who's just one of my personal heroes of all time. And I pitched the story to We Animals Media, and they really liked it, so they funded this project to produce this film. And that was that.
Wow. I think it's a few of the things you said really are our resident, right? We never know what's the thing that's going to make a difference. Why should I do this thing? Why should I do that thing? But oftentimes, right, even the images, as we know from history, whether it's, say, a civil rights movement or a revolutionary movement or whatever else, there's like a specific image that takes hold or a specific clip. And somehow that's the thing that works. And there's really no rhyme or reason to it, right? It's not like, oh, it's because it's from this angle or because this is in the frame. It's just such a variety of forces at work, and it lands at a certain time or someone sees it and affects them in a certain way. So I think that's probably what happens with a lot of documentary filmmakers is you put a film out, maybe it's not getting traction for a while, whatever, and then like all of a sudden something you do or at a certain time or you show it somewhere and it kind of drops into that current, right, or to that stream and then gets taken away. And so, yeah, Chris, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to, I was going to ask you a little bit about Switzerland because it's actually where you are, but as an ethnographer who deals more with like text than images, you're still in the field of creating stories, right? And communicating in a way that is not just merely conveying fact. So how do you approach storytelling, or what do you see its unique power in your work?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Thomas, for the wonderful film. It makes me feel a little bit homesick. I'm actually outside of Switzerland at the moment. And I really appreciated the power of this film and the storytelling, as Jonathan has pointed out. Yes, so I am trained as an ethnographer where I go in and I'm with communities and I'm with people. And we can say, in this case, I'm with non-human people and I'm with them and I'm observing them all the time. And in particular, in Switzerland, I think what you can really see here in the storytelling with animals and with the people who are with animals in various relationships in various ways, as we've seen here, is it's not so black and white as we imagine. And I think this is one of the things that ethnography and anthropology really brings out. When you study culture, when you study the way that people are living their day-to-day, quotidian, habitual lives of just trying to make it through the day, it's often difficult. You can see people are torn in this story. You can see people, on the one hand, rely on the subjugation and mistreatment of animals as we see for their livelihood, but on the other hand, they don't want to do it anymore. And in many ways, when you get down into the details of the story, you can see how people are sometimes trapped in a system where they aren't able to find a way out. And it becomes so critically important to be able to see those nuances in our research, in anything that we research as ethnographers or anthropologists. We have to be able to go in and see what is really happening on the ground, instead of coming to some sort of immediate judgment of people and what they're doing and farmers and all this. You can see that these farmers in this story in particular are really struggling to make this transition and really lack the resources to make this transition, even though they want to. And so this film really brought that out for me, Thomas, and I think it really shows the power of storytelling and why it's so important to tell people's individual stories, because these individual stories add up to a kind of message that we can see, and it shows the nuance and the kind of gray areas of how these people are in these tense situations where they want the animals to have a better life. They want the animals to live. They don't want to participate in the slaughter. And yeah, that really came out for me in terms of the power of ethnography, the power of being with people and really seeing who they are and what it is they go through as fellow human beings.
You know what I think of when you say that, especially the part about gray areas, is like it seems to me to be all gray area. And, we want to divide things into black and white and like good and bad and right and wrong. And I think that without contemplative practices and an understanding of like what a gray area is and how it exists and who exists in it, without contemplative practice, it's so hard to understand that and like hold space for it.
Yeah, I was going to just add one comment, and then I would like Diana actually to share some reflections too, as a photographer themselves, in this respect. But I think this conversation about gray areas is critical, and this is also where a important piece of the documentary is this kind of understanding that people who are either actively or kind of on the way out of animal farming, actually, you can see it, deeply care actually about the animals that they own or maybe even use. And I think that there is a way not to welcome that grayness in a lot of discussions about animals, right? It's either like you don't use animals and you love them and you care about them, or you do use them and you don't care about and you don't love them. And in recent work even that I've done, I've tried to highlight that we can still do things that ultimately we regret to people we love, right? Or we can do wrong things, as it were, to people we love. And I think that there's long been this kind of challenge that actually that's not love or that's not care. But that's a very complicated question, because when you actually talk to a lot of these people, they are really trying to navigate their care and the system that they're involved in. And so I don't actually have like a period on the end of that comment. It's more like it is complicated and it is gray. And I think what Sarah says in the film, that like, even telling people like, you shouldn't be doing this, you should transfarm. At the end of the day, is that really going to welcome people into that shift of consciousness, that shift in contemplation, and ultimately that shift in practice? Probably not. And so I think there's a moment in which the complexity is hard to balance with the urgency. And I think this is what troubles a lot of advocates, is there's this urgency and an enormity of an issue, but there needs to be patience, and it is gray and it is challenging. So, and I do think one benefit of this film, which might not be immediately what is a takeaway, is to illustrate the turmoil that is going on in individuals who actually do care and trying to figure it out. But Diana, I'm sure you have a few thoughts too on storytelling, picture taking, and so on.
Yeah, I do have a few thoughts. What you just mentioned there around like the complexity and the urgency coming together, I think also plays a really big part in storytelling and in like any work of photography or an artistic approach to animal advocacy, because we often don't know, like we don't know the other side of the story. Like I could drive by any of these farms in Switzerland and see the condition of some of these animals before they were in this process of transfarming, and probably have a lot of personal opinions around who these farmers are, why they're inflicting so much harm. And it's films like this, and also the kind of taking the time and the patience, as you said, to really unpack all of the issues that are kind of so intricately woven together that are, kind of what happens in animal agriculture. And so I think in those same lines, I know for me personally, my own practice really helps with the reactivity that I immediately experience when I see animals in harmful situations, and that before I go out and photograph farms or photograph dairy farms, or even before I go to sanctuaries, I often will take time and make sure I have practices in place to kind of mentally prepare me for actually just showing up for the animals. And I think that's it. It's like when I'm actually photographing some of the places that I've seen, it's not the being there that's difficult. I mean, it's difficult in its own way, but sometimes you just have a certain amount of time, and I just want to be in presence with the animals there. And it's kind of the pre and post experience of doing this kind of work that is where the contemplative practices really help. I will often not be able to look at some of the photos for a little while, and have to take time before I go back and do any photo editing. But I do think that meditation practice, all of these ways that we recognize our immediate response to what we see the animals are experiencing can really help advocacy work, because I think too it also helps when we encounter people who have very different opinions than we do, or are even in this work themselves, to have a conversation, just like you had mentioned, Jonathan, that if Sarah would call up these farmers and say, like, you need to stop doing this, change wouldn't happen. There's definitely places where urgency is needed, but for these bigger systemic shifts to happen, there really needs to be spaciousness to open up in some of these gray areas. And I'll give one small example before I pass it along. I found out about a big rescue that was going to kind of be underway in Oregon earlier this year, where somebody had posted that they're trying to sell off like an entire flock of 4,000 hens that were in an organic farm, because they were no longer producing eggs at the level that the farm needed them to produce them, and they were just going to sell off the flock to anyone who wanted to come and buy the hens for $10 a piece. And so they called them in their ad, they called them laying machines on Craigslist. And so an activist in Portland saw the Facebook post, and then saw the Craigslist post and immediately reacted, but did get everyone starting to move in the direction of how we can help. So this huge rescue kind of started to get planned behind the scenes, a lot of logistics and all of that. When it finally came to the first day of us going to the farm to see if we could negotiate some of these hens, I actually was one of the main negotiators to talk to the farmer. And little did I know that he had posted this ad and described them as laying machines, because when he posted it differently on Facebook, it got flagged and taken down. And so this farmer actually wanted these hens to go to sanctuaries, to go to people's homes. He didn't want to see these animals being exploited anymore. And so he had to frame his ad a certain way to be able to get maybe us to show up for these animals and actually get as many as we could out of the situation. And so it's often not what we think. And I think that finding ways to quiet down the immediate reactivity that we have, especially when we love animals so much and want to see a different outcome for them, can really be a great way forward. So long answer to your question, but hope that was something.
No, it certainly was. On that note, I will pivot to a few questions we received. So first off, from Mary, Tommy, it says on your website that you're working on another film called Sanctuary. Is that true? And are you currently working on it?
It is true. It's not called Sanctuary, but we are working on another film, and we're working on many other photo stories and articles as well. The next film that we have coming up is called A Promise of Paradise. It's actually something along the same lines, and I'll answer part of Hope's question in the Q&A too with this. The next film, A Promise of Paradise, is about an ex-rancher in Oklahoma who decided to stop ranching and send all of his herd to sanctuaries instead of to slaughter. So that will be coming out in 2025. And Hope's, part of your question, Hope, was, can you talk about the importance of envisioning a positive future? No, that's not the part I wanted to answer.
How about I read this last question at least,
okay,
or something,
sure.
So that others know. So Hope commented, vegans are so often viewed as in conflict with farmers, but this film shows that so many of us have things in common. Most farmers are not intending to harm animals, but it's inherent in the system. Envisioning the world we want is just as important as bringing attention to the problems. I think these stories are harder to find. To anyone on the panel, can you talk about the importance of envisioning the positive future we want to see? And if you have any thoughts on how we can do more of that?
Thanks. Yeah, the part I wanted to speak to is the stories are hard to find. Well, hopefully the work we're doing at Sanctuary Doc will make these stories easier to find, is what I wanted to say. So all of the stories we try to, exist in the gray area, but enter it through the door of compassion for animals. And so hopefully in the way we're telling these stories, it is bringing attention to the problems and kind of like making the complex, sticky, icky stuff seem less complicated.
I think also an interesting part of this is that so much of the stories you're telling, or at least the story we just watched, is about people's like work, their livelihoods, right? Their jobs, as it were. And interestingly enough, I mean, this is beyond the scope of this panel, is we kind of stop there. But really what the issue is about things such as food systems, production systems, social nets for individual, how we have to work. And people are always concerned about, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive? And then also we should always be kind of focusing on, well, yes, it is a little bit bizarre that people are worried about how they can literally survive in the world if they're not continuing to operate in a system in which their profit margins are slim, they're working grueling hours, and they don't even really want to be involved in it anymore. And then we constantly have this question of jobs and survival. So it's for a different panel, but I think the next logical question is, but it is related to what Hope said, is how do we reimagine a future that's not just, say, a non-animal exploiting future? That would be part of it, but also one in which all of these other factors that are delaying kind of these movements are also addressed, which I think at Arihanta we try to focus on too, like say in our Compassion Studies initiative, like how are we working towards other humans as well? How can we modify systems in which humans and animals are just interwoven through and through, instead of thinking that we can just like solve, send them all to sanctuary. Yeah. And then we have to worry about, well, how are sanctuaries operating? Where are they getting their funding? I mean, this is the problem of cow sanctuaries in India, right? You could never house all of these cows. It's impossible. It's just a symptom of the problem, not a solution. So I'm kind of going off a little bit, but I really feel like this is critical, and it's a way that I think in the kind of seams of the documentary, you see like, oh wow, we really should be talking about these adjacent issues as well. So we also have a comment here that it's not really a question, but Agni commented that they live in an area with many farms, but most of all are locked up in corporate contracts. It occurs to me that farms must be able to be independent before they can transfarm. This leads me to seek more information about independent farms. I appreciate this film a great deal because probably only farmers know how to move from one mode of farming into another one. So Tommy, I guess I would just ask, because you were on the scene at least a bit for this film, did you either directly ask those questions or hear about the challenges that, say, certain farmers have as opposed to others in Switzerland?
I think it's a bit unique in Switzerland because the farms that we're transfarming are kind of like independently owned, family operated for generations. And so, yes, I would say that there is some more flexibility to make your own decisions. The big leap for most of them is the financial, like bridging the financial gap between stopping animal exploitation, starting a sanctuary, or switching to chickpeas or oat milk. And what's brilliant about the work that Sarah does is that she has a whole financial assistance program that helps people bridge that gap. And they do financial planning and evaluations. We did a screening of this film, and Deanna, you might have to remind me who was working on transfarming in the U.S.
Yeah, that's I was just typing a note to Agni. It was Angela De Freitas from Animal Outlook. She's the director of farm transitions.
Yeah.
And she had mentioned that I believe that there were some farmers who had been under contract with animal agriculture, were losing money, and were coming to her, and she was working with them on how to shift out of it and find other work.
And I think actually to hit the last point in here, Agni, is farmers, in a lot of cases, they actually don't know how to move from one mode of farming to the other. I mean, obviously they have the logistical things and they've got barns and tractors and that sort of stuff, but making that change is kind of like, it's changing your whole business model and lifestyle. So people like Sarah and Angela, are there luckily as a resource. And I think envisioning a future where more people can do that probably involves more of these like transfarming consultants to help people do that.
Great. And I think maybe just another, or maybe a final, unless another question comes in, but a comment that I think brings us a little bit back to Chris's location, at least where they usually are in Switzerland, and some of the work that you two do is a lot about how the work, I mean, not as much in transfarming, but there's certainly tons of images that you have in the film that elicit this, is this consistent need to highlight individuality of animals and that they're kind of there individually experiencing their surrounding. It's not just some flock, it's not just some group, it's not kind of like a bale of hay, right? This kind of way in which we're just kind of inundated with this notion of the farm that makes it so hard to kind of pause. But I guess I was kind of curious, I can ask Chris to maybe add a little bit here about, you went from the US to Switzerland. In US, we have so much this concealment of animals. And we always say this to individuals, you hardly ever see any of the animals that you consume. For those that consume, you never really see them. So I'm just kind of curious, Chris, I know you haven't been there so long and you're only in one area, but what would you say about this kind of politics of sight, as it were? I'm kind of loosely using Tim Petrat's phrase, where concealment, obscuration, and visibility change from location to location. And in this case, I'm asking mostly from the US to Swiss transition.
Yeah, I've spent, of the past decade, I've spent about half of the time in between university semesters and whatnot in Switzerland, and now permanently live there. And there's certainly this concealment. I remember as a child driving through California on the 5 freeway going north, and you will occasionally see herds of cows, right? Which, as you say, are all individuals, of course. But I mean, just these massive herds of cows, and you can smell them as you're driving up the 5 freeway. And so it was rare, but shocking when I did see it as a child in the United States. When you go to Switzerland, which is a small country, of course, you're much more surrounded by the animal agriculture. It's kind of embedded within the social fabric, in the social reality of everyone who lives there. Even if you live in the city, if you just go right outside the city of Zurich, for example, you're going to see animal farms everywhere. And you're also going to see big open pieces of land where food is being grown, but that food is likely being grown for animals, not for humans. And I recall one of the most kind of shocking moments for me, it was one of the first times I was in Switzerland almost 10 years ago, that I was on a hike with my wife, and we got to the top of the mountain, and there was an image of how the landscape used to look, 200 years ago or so, or even longer before. And it was all this lush, beautiful forest everywhere, so dense, so green, so verdant. And it said, now compare this picture that you're looking at to what you actually see down below you in the valley, which was tiny patches of trees here and there, and just tons and tons, predominantly farmland. The trees had been cleared. And so it has been, there is a sort of, as you say, there's a shock to seeing it, to seeing what has happened, and seeing that it hasn't always been that way, and that cultural traditions, whether I'm in the United States or in Switzerland, change, and the landscape hasn't always looked like this. Animals haven't always been treated this way on such a scale as they are now. And I can bring this all home, I think, by saying that right now I'm in Hawaii, right? And I was driving up on the Big Island. I used to live here as well. I was driving up through an area called Waimea, which used to be vast sandalwood forest. And as I was driving up there, what do you see there now? It's vast grazing land for, the popular so-called grass-fed beef that they have here on the Big Island. And as I looked around, I knew immediately that the same thing that had happened in Switzerland with regard to clearing the land and then grazing these animals to eat their bodies, the same thing had happened in Waimea. You know, the same thing, these beautiful sandalwood forests had been cleared to create grazing land, to create what is now seen and perceived as a tradition that has only been around, you know, since, you know, a couple hundred, 100 years or so at most. I mean, it hasn't been that long. And so there is, I think anywhere we go in any part of the world, we will see that. And in Switzerland, definitely, you're just surrounded by what for many people feels like a normal reality, but has only been going on for a certain period of time, right? And seeing that and knowing that makes it possible to change, because as an ethnographer, going back to that again, we know that culture is always changing and traditions are always changing. So we can envision a new future and a new culture in Switzerland, but also all over the world, here in Hawaii as well.
Before I kind of pass it back to Deanna to close, I think that raises just like a kind of a point or an end point that harkens back to Hope's comment, which is really like, right, I think we look around and we say, like, if we could go back, we wouldn't choose this. Like, if we go back in time, how many people would say, like, yes, we should clear the sandalwood forests for grazing land. That was a wonderful idea. We should repeat that program again, you know? And I think that very much will help us understand the kind of future that we would envision that would be different. And so it's a little bit sad to say, yes, we would never choose this, but at least it lets us know what we would like to move away from. And as Chris said, this is a relatively recent phenomenon, which means that solutions do exist and certainly could be implemented. So I pass it to Deanna.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Thomas and Chris, for your reflections and comments, and thank you all for your questions, and also, of course, for being here. And one more comment from Agni, appreciating Chris's perspective on the tradition, quote unquote, of cattle farming, and how easy it is to see. It's very easy to see what's wrong, and very rarely do we get an opportunity to actually see how we can move in a more compassionate direction. So there is still, as Agni said, still a possibility. And I think as long as that we are here, that there's definitely still a possibility. So again, thank you all for joining us today. We are grateful to have had this collaboration. There's a couple of links in the chat for some of the things that we mentioned if you want to take a look before we wrap up. And I hope that our time together inspires a compassionate future, and one that is based in awareness and clarity and action, and actually really diving into the gray areas. So perhaps we left you with more questions than answers today, but we look forward to seeing you at another Arihanta event, and hope to share more stories with Sanctuary Doc. So farewell for now, and we will see you next time.